If we're lucky, gaming is going to have a bright future and you will be eating good. And the reason why is embodied in this quote. "We have the tech now to make those games with a relatively small team. Games like this are coming. We are lucky to be early." Now, those words came from Guillaume, who is the creative director of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and he was talking to the New York Times. And honestly, in a way, he is describing 2025. A year of games made by smaller teams built by ex-AAA talent using every tech and industry trick available to somehow compete with the biggest studios in the world, and actually winning on their own terms for their own audiences. If he's saying that they were early and more is coming, then we have a lot to look forward to. But unfortunately, reality is a little bit more complicated than that. Game of the Year, 8 other awards, 5 million sales since April. It's all kind of insane. What we see is that Expedition 33 isn't just some well-received game that kind of defined the year, because if it was just that, we'd be equally talking about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Silksong. Just that, well, Silksong is a smaller indie with a different story, and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was a Herculean project from a larger-than-average team. Still, an absolutely incredible game, though. But I'd say that Expedition 33 is Game of the Year because of the story behind it. Everyone loves an underdog taking on the Titans and somehow winning. But I think it's also because we want to believe. We all have games that disappointed us completely, that shattered our faith in large-scale development. So that's why a story of a bunch of ex-Ubisoft devs. I mean, Guillaume wasn't even a core dev, he was a brand manager. Their lead writer joined via Reddit. It was their first industry gig. The composer was found on SoundCloud. And it's a team of under 50 total. So whenever the story got out, it resonated. It was experienced devs mentoring newcomers. It actually worked. It was a feel-good narrative, but one that was able to target the specific way we've all felt left down by gaming. But that's not all that made it compelling. You see, this team struggled for funding. They turned to friends and family. Sandfall Interactive even claims that the budget was around 10 million. So basically, outsourcing plus team discipline kept their costs contained. It was a scrappy and cheap game, but it looked like the best of the industry because of how far our tech has came. Right? Photoreal environments, award-winning actors, high-fidelity models with an aesthetic that's distinctive enough that it doesn't just blend into the usual sea of Unreal Engine 5, even if it could still sometimes run like a UE5 game. The modern tooling means that almost anyone can hit AAA visual fidelity now. What matters is, do they have the skill to stand out in some other way? Do they have the artistic skill to actually make good on all of this new tooling? Now, it's not just that. Sandfall did have publisher support, they had a timely Game Pass deal, and a compelling pitch about bringing back turn-based RPGs. Of course, turn-based RPGs never really left, but I do see their point. It's been a long time since Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, a game which, of course, Final Fantasy X is a shameless rip-off of, and I'll hear no words to the contrary. Which is to say that all that got them in the public eye, but what kept them in the public eye was actually their talent, was the quality of their product. But here's what I think the real story is, right? That's why we've made this video. It's the one that people are latching onto. It's not just small teams make good games. Maybe it's telling us something else. Maybe it's telling us that the AAA model was always broken, and it just got to the stage where it became so broken it's just stopped working. And maybe we all got behind Expedition 33 because in it we see a future, we see hope, and a real alternative. Now that I've said that, well, we need to get into the cold numbers. Look, these games are not cracking the top 10 or 20 best sellers, but they also don't need to. They still have to make their money back, absolutely, but a game doesn't have to sell 10 million copies and appeal to everyone on Earth in order to survive. If it's something like Expedition 33, a focused experience that tells a specific story with no live service, no microtransactions, and for a lot of us, that is heartening, and it's what we want to see. And of course, it makes sense that that would do well. We've talked before about how the biggest publishers for a long time have been chasing an ever-shrinking audience of high-spending players, the people who will buy every bit of slop that the AAAs throw at them. That's got so bad that it started to drive us away from games. And in the case of Jagex, it quite literally drove so many people away from RuneScape that they decided they needed to revamp their entire business model and cut away a lot of the bullshit because, well, they actually need players for their game. And focusing just the highest paying payers is ultimately a loser's game, because that resource can actually run out if you piss off enough people. Now, the good news is that all of this has left space for other games to stand out, because they are not competing for the same wallets. For those of us driven away by all that bullshit, it's not like we would either buy Expedition 33 or a bunch of Fortnite skins. So maybe there's a realization that a lot of us have wallets and we're willing to take money out of that wallet, but we just want good video game in return. In an ideal world, that's the flywheel of growth that can actually get the industry back, at least the bit of it that we love. Though as I will soon cover, it is not all just positive. There are a lot of negatives out there, and one of those was Xbox pulling the rug out from under developers like the Romeros. And on them, I do have a pleasant update for you, because they've actually since pivoted on their game, and they're now rebuilding it with a smaller team and a different scope, but thankfully, they are still alive. So they've been able to strike it out on their own, almost setting themselves against the big publishers who let them down. That's the sort of story that audiences, like with Expedition 33, love to support. But even with all that said, I know that cynicism exists for a reason. And very much it is the case that just because you're an ex-AAA dev, well, that doesn't mean you're going to succeed. That's something that 2025 also made abundantly clear. Two of the year's biggest flops came from the ex-leadership of one of the world's most expensive and successful games ever. Leslie Benzies made his name at Rockstar building GTA. And when he announced his next project as a linear, focused narrative adventure that would buck AAA trends, people got hyped. I mean, hey, same story as Expedition 33, proof that big companies and management structures just hold creatives back. Well, in that case, perhaps Leslie and his management team were the ones holding people back. Mind's Eye ended up being one of the worst received games of recent years. Of course, not matching GTA would have been completely fine, but it launched as a bug-ridden, poorly designed, graphically dull mess that needed months more development. It's now in a far better state, which is testament to the developers involved, but what matters here is the launch of this game just went kaput. It didn't matter that the studio was full of ex-AAA devs with mountains of experience and with mountains of funding, or that they were chasing a third-person action genre that's long gone and that maybe people would like to see come back. No, the launch sucked. Staff got laid off after it flopped, but management couldn't even do that properly. They seemingly did it in such a messy way that it may have broken UK employment law, so they're now facing lawsuits, whilst the remaining staff are basically just demanding that leadership gets out of their way. So that's one of the ways these studios fall. Overconfidence. The assumption that your vision alone is why your AAA blockbuster succeeded. But it's not the only way. And there are other developers in a similar boat who know that. We're much more cautious and have ended up being no more successful. All this year, we've been tracking a group called Dreamhaven. Now, Dreamhaven are founded by Mike Morhaime. Mike Morhaime is one of the co-founders of Blizzard. He is a rich dude, and Dreamhaven was basically full of ex-AAA talent. And whenever they released Thunderfolk, we were excited. It was a distinctive co-op experience that was trying to capture the feeling of board game night. And they'd done it in a fairly innovative way. Like, even the game's purchase model was innovative. Then there's Wildgate. It's a co-op extraction game, I'd say built in the mold of the sorts of games that have been sweeping Steam charts, but with certainly enough of its own twist to stand out. But maybe not stand out in a way that people wanted, because sadly, neither of these things worked. Critics liked them. Players liked them, but they just didn't sell. The company ended up telling staff that they just hadn't seen the response that they had hoped for, and layoffs then followed. These were not Mind's Eye. These were solid games. They launched well, but they still couldn't find an audience. They weren't even like another situation with ex-Blizzard developers, of course in the form of Frost Giant and their game, their StarCraft 2 successor, which had a rough launch and now looks to have a questionable at best future. So what we can see is that even in the case of those Dreamhaven games that came out well, the ex-AAA pedigree, the skill, just wasn't enough. They just weren't able to break through. And they weren't alone in failing to break through. Eternal Strands came from BioWare's Mike Laidlaw and a bunch of Ubisoft Quebec veterans. Then there's Spectre Divide. Spectre Divide had Double Fine and Naughty Dog alumni. It obviously didn't do well. The 100-line Last Defense Academy was from the Danganronpa people. Sandfall even gave them a public shout-out because Sandfall, the Expedition 33 devs, did not want to see that game fail. But none of that mattered. Hard-earned prestige, great mechanics just could not combine to guarantee success. And even the tools that helped Expedition 33 can cut the other way, right? We know Expedition 33 was using some AI stuff. One little bit of that did actually get caught into the final game in the form of a poster that was shortly removed and fixed up after launch. Perhaps it was tastefully implemented and allowed the company to do things well. Though obviously we have seen many other AI stories in the news in the last few days, and of course over this entire year, where it has not always ended up like that. But even forgetting the robots, there is of course also the people, and one way people are involved in games is via outsourcing. Now, outsourcing, I need to tell you, is not a universally bad thing. It's actually one of the ways that people can find stable employment without falling to the boom and bust cycle of loads of studios. They do have a good role, and very often a game studio actually will benefit from outsourcing because they will only commit to the outsourcing whenever they've got a good enough brief, a good enough spec for their game. Nothing will kill a game like a company being so large that it's spending its early, mid, whatever production just finding something for people to do, rather than, in a disciplined fashion, making the best game possible. So I'm not against outsourcing, I don't think you should be either, but it doesn't always go well, and the more our industry decides to outsource, especially to regions where there's an economic disparity, the worse things can go. Like with Brandeville Studios, they're an Indonesian outsourcing company that were brutally abusing their staff for cheap labor, whilst their Western partners benefited, even the likes of Naughty Dog. But, it just wasn't something that they knew about. Whenever people talk about cleaning up the human rights of their supply chain, I guess this is the games industry getting a taste of that. Meanwhile, of course, for Sandfall, their outsourcing did seemingly go well, but more things went well. As an example, they got publisher funding at a time when funding is at historic lows for everyone else. Just listen to the words or vibes of anyone coming off a major industry event like a Gamescom or a GDC, and there's a good example to back this up. It's a Kickstarted game called Alazra Radiant Echoes, and it is so similar to Expedition 33. It's channeling the energy of beloved classics from Japan, it's got some pretty cool names attached to it, it's also got a bunch of the French involved as well, so you'd think, oh wow, they have got all these Expedition 33 ingredients, and my god do their screenshots not look gorgeous. But their game got cancelled because they just couldn't get any funding, regardless of how many ex-AAA devs they had, because it turns out team size and cheap tools just don't matter when you cannot pay people. No, you need everything to go right. Not everyone is in a Silksong-like situation where the scrappiness and the hard grind of their first game just gave them pure freedom to make the best thing they possibly could. And that is worth remembering as we now go to tee up 2026, the year ahead. By no means is this video shitting on Expedition 33. It's a spectacular success, and it shows what happens whenever the talent, the tools, the timing, the luck, all of those things align. But we also need to be honest about the rest of the industry because Expedition 33 had it all go right. The talent, the funding, the tools, the partners, even a meta-narrative behind the game that made everyone want to root for them because, look, Sandfall in that game kind of are the opposite of what AAA's been giving us vibes-wise for so long. Of course we want to succeed, but they're not the only team capable of that kind of thing. It's just that some of those other teams weren't as lucky, were not able to cut through. There are so many times in this channel where I've covered a game that has not went well, and where people in the comments have just said, holy shit, I wish I knew about that earlier so I could have supported the damn thing whenever it actually mattered. There was a massive problem of discoverability. We've seen the likes of Steam try to improve that, but it just goes to show, whenever we see stories that could be an Expedition 33, and where it seems responsible to back them up, where it doesn't seem like it's snake oil, we really need to get better at backing those teams up and getting them out there. Because in order to change the industry, we need more financial successes for games like this one. And that's because basically you need the luck. But luck is not just a roll of a dice. Luck is really all about causality. Improbable things can happen, but they often don't happen purely randomly. You know the phrase, you make your own luck. You have to go out there in order to be lucky. Now, that's something for developers to think of. But as audiences, we should also think about that as well, because whenever we share a game that we think is cool, that is us increasing that team's luck surface area. And the more we do that, the more chances great games have of actually catching on. And when they do catch on, then we can prove that the games industry can support more than just live service slop. So that's to say, it's more complicated than just saying, throw off the chains of AAA and you'll be fine. Those chains were real, but so is everything else. However, speaking of chains and the people who forged them, Ubisoft has had the wildest year for any major publisher I can really think of. Family drama, boardroom chaos, honestly, probably enough for a HBO show, just a company tearing itself apart, and madness. If you want to see how all of that's going on, well, there isn't a HBO show, but I think our video does a real good job of it, and you can watch it next.